You're in the tea aisle at the grocery store. Row after row of familiar names: chamomile, Earl Grey, green tea. Then you notice a small tin with a bright green label and one word on the front: matcha. And it's priced like it's something special. You pick it up and think, how different can it really be? It's just tea. But matcha is one of those simple things that hides a lot. Because it isn't brewed like tea. It's taken in like tea leaf and all, in powder form. And that one difference changes everything: the taste, the texture, and why one cup can feel smooth and creamy, while another tastes bitter and grassy. So today, let's separate the real thing from the lookalikes. We'll pin down what matcha actually is, where it came from, and why a good matcha doesn't happen by accident. Now, let's start with a clean definition right here on Secrets of Simple Things. What matcha really is, and what it isn't. So let's start with the clean definition. Matcha is not any green tea that's been ground into powder. Real matcha is made from a specific kind of leaf called tencha tea leaves that are grown and prepared for one purpose: to be ground into a fine powder. That's why matcha tastes so different from regular green tea. With most green tea, you steep the leaves in hot water, and then you throw the leaves away. With matcha, you're drinking the leaf itself. The whole thing just in powder form. And here's the key detail. Those leaves are usually grown under shade before harvest. That shading changes the leaf's chemistry. It deepens the green color and shifts the flavor toward that smooth, savory umami people talk about. So when a menu says matcha, it might mean the real thing, or it might mean something that only looks like it. Now that we know what matcha is, the next question is obvious. Where did this idea even come from? The history twist nobody expects. Here's the part most people don't see coming. Matcha feels so Japanese that we treat it like it's always been there. But the basic idea, tea leaves turned into a powder and whisked into a froth, started in China centuries ago. Back then, during China's Song dynasty, whisked powdered tea wasn't a health trend. It was a refined drink, almost like a performance. People cared about the foam, the texture, the elegance of it. Then the story takes a turn. Japanese monks traveled to China to study, and they brought that powdered tea practice back with them. Not because it was fashionable, because it was useful. During long meditation, matcha helped them stay awake, steady, and focused. Over time, Japan didn't just copy the idea. It preserved it, it refined it, and eventually, it became part of a whole tradition, what we now think of as the Japanese tea ceremony, built around attention, simplicity, and quiet precision. That's the strange twist. The practice faded where it began, but in Japan, it became a living craft. And once you know that, the next part makes sense. Because to get matcha's color and flavor today, the process had to become just as intentional, starting right out in the fields. The same matcha, different habits. And that's the strange twist. The practice faded where it began. But in Japan, it became a living craft. Then matcha did what almost every good idea eventually does. It traveled. And when it traveled, it changed not in the leaf, but in the habit. In Japan, matcha is still treated like a practice. Quiet, focused, deliberate. In China, the older whisked powder style belongs mostly to history, while everyday tea moved towards steeping loose leaves. In Korea, matcha found a modern home in cafe culture, often showing up in desserts and lattes. And here in the U.S., most people meet matcha as a latte first, sweetened, creamy, sitting right next to coffee on the menu. Same word, different routines. Which is exactly why matcha can taste completely different from one cup to the next. So, if we want to understand the difference, why one cup feels smooth and steady while another tastes bitter and thin, we have to go back to the part people never see. Not the cafe. The field. From field to powder. Why good matcha can't be rushed. To understand matcha, don't start in a cafe, start in a field. The first big decision happens weeks before harvest. Farmers shade the tea plants for about 3 to 4 weeks. When the plant gets less sunlight, it adapts. It puts more energy into chlorophyll, which deepens that vivid green. And it shifts the flavor less sharp, more of that smooth, savory umami. Then comes the harvest. And this is where matcha gets picky. Only the youngest, most tender leaves are chosen. Older leaves and stems tend to taste tougher and more bitter, so they're avoided. That careful selection is part of what you're paying for. Right after picking, the leaves are steamed, quickly. This stops oxidation, the same process that would dull the color and change the taste. Think of it like pressing pause. Steaming helps lock in that fresh green character. After steaming, the leaves are dried. Then they're cleaned up. Stems and veins are removed, because matcha isn't trying to be a leafy tea. It's trying to become a pure, smooth powder. What's left is called tencha, the special leaf that exists mainly for one job, getting ground. And now we reach the step that explains the price. Tencha is traditionally ground using a stone mill, and it moves painfully slowly, about 30 to 40 grams an hour. That's roughly one small tin. Why so slow? Because speed creates friction. Friction creates heat. And heat steals the very things matcha is valued for: aroma, sweetness, and that silky texture. So good matcha is expensive for a simple reason. It's designed not to hurry. It's a product where slowness is not a flaw, it's the point. And once you know that, a lot of common matcha mistakes suddenly make sense. Common matcha myths and why they happen. Once you know how matcha is made, a few popular beliefs start to fall apart. Myth number 1. Matcha is just green tea powder. Not quite. Real matcha is tencha that was grown and prepared specifically to be ground. A lot of matcha products are simply powdered green tea, and the taste gives it away more bitter, less smooth. Myth number 2. If it's bitter, it must be healthier. That's a common one, but harsh bitterness is often a warning sign, not a badge of honor. It can mean lower quality leaf, stale powder, or simply water that was too hot. Myth number 3. Hotter water brings out more flavor. With matcha, very hot water can bring out more roughness too. Many people get a better cup when the water is warm, not boiling around 175 degrees Fahrenheit to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 80 degrees Celsius. Myth number 4. A matcha latte means the matcha is good. Not necessarily. Milk and sugar can hide a lot. A latte can taste pleasant even when the matcha underneath is flat or coarse. So, if you've ever tried matcha and thought, "I don't get the hype," you may not be wrong. You may have just met the look-alike. Now, the practical question is the one that matters. How do you pick a good matcha and make it taste the way it's supposed to taste at home? How to make matcha taste smooth, not bitter. If your matcha has ever tasted rough or grassy, you don't need a new personality. You need a better method. These tips are designed to do one thing: make matcha taste the way it's supposed to taste, smooth, creamy, and clean. To buy the right matcha for the job? If you drink it plain, or you want matcha to be the main flavor, choose ceremonial or drinking grade. If you're baking or mixing it into desserts, culinary grade is usually enough, and it costs less. To avoid stale, flat-tasting matcha, look for a brighter green color and a fresh, leafy smell. If it looks dull or yellowish, or it smells stale, the cup will usually taste flat or bitter. To stop clumps before they start, sift your matcha through a small sieve before adding water. This is the fastest way to make the texture feel silky instead of gritty. To prevent that harsh, burnt taste, Use warm water, not boiling. Aim for about 175 degrees Fahrenheit to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, around 80 degrees Celsius. No thermometer? Let boiling water sit for a few minutes first. To get a smooth cup without overthinking the measurements, use a simple ratio, about 2 grams, roughly half a teaspoon, to about 60 milliliters of water. Whisk for about 15 seconds. To create foam without making the flavor rough, whisk near the surface in quick W strokes. Don't stir slowly, and don't whisk deep like you're beating eggs. Light and fast is the trick. To make a latte that doesn't taste like chalk, whisk matcha with a small amount of warm water. First make it smooth, then add milk. Don't dump powder straight into milk. To keep matcha from fading after you open it, store it airtight, away from light and heat. Use it sooner rather than later. Matcha is delicate. Time and air are not its friends. Do these things, and matcha stops being a gamble. It becomes consistent. Matcha has always carried a quiet idea from the world it came from. Not everything gets better when we make it faster. Some things only get better when we give them our full attention. That's why matcha became part of meditation and tea practice in the first place. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to steady you. So if there's one thing worth keeping from this story, it's this. The quality you feel in a cup is often the result of how something was treated along the way and how you meet it in the moment. Next time you drink matcha, even for 30 seconds, try not to multitask. Just taste it. Notice it. Let it do what it was made to do. How do you enjoy yours, plain or in a latte?